Okay. All right. Let's get started. Let me share a bit about myself. So, growing up, I always felt different from others. I often felt like people kind of got the rules and I didn't, or that I was missing something that they understood. And other times I felt like I was seeing things or picking up things or feeling things that other people didn't. And that was particularly around, for instance, the pain and trauma of the world or other people's emotions. I can see this now in hindsight. I wasn't so aware of it then. I was a little bit. I was aware of feeling separate. I was aware of feeling alone at times, and of feeling like people didn't always understand me. And I actually remember when I was in grade 2, so I must have been around 8. A girl in the class told me that we discovered that her father had been in a bus accident and he'd been killed. And I went home that afternoon and I cried, but I stayed in my bedroom. And the whole time I was crying, I had this image of him being hit by a bus. I don't even think we'd been told he'd been hit by a bus, but that was in my mind. That was, he may have been in his car and the bus hit his car, but I had this very clear image that I couldn't let go of. And I had such a sense of what she must be going through, and I couldn't let that go. And I remember clearly feeling silly, like as if I was overreacting, but at the same time, I couldn't help what I was feeling. It was real. And then I was thinking, am I making this up? Am I being silly? So I didn't want to tell my mum because I felt like she'd maybe say that I was overreacting or just, I don't know what I was afraid of, but I just had the sense that it wasn't okay, but I also couldn't help what I was feeling. So yeah, there was also, if I think about it, I often said and did things that afterwards I was like, well, why did I do that? Why didn't I think properly before I did it? And so then I'd feel ashamed of myself. And this often went with the whole not getting the rules thing. And then also I had a lot of physical symptoms, particularly I had what was called spastic colon, which I suspect is IBS, related to anxiety and stress. And, I didn't want to accept that I wasn't normal, because who does? It's such a loaded word. Normal makes you think that then if you're not normal, you must be abnormal, which is somehow bad or wrong. So I guess I just kind of denied what made me different and tried to be normal. And then being diagnosed with adrenal fatigue syndrome definitely made me feel different from other people and a little bit weird. And then going down a spiritual path, which put me more in the world of woo-woo, also made me feel different from others. And so slowly I felt more and more different. And it was only recently, fairly recently, that I realized that it was those exact differences that were behind why I ultimately burnt out and was diagnosed with adrenal fatigue syndrome in 2013. So let me explain. I know most of you, but just for those who don't know me, and also for those who'll be watching the replay, I am, well, firstly, actually, before I even do that, I'm wondering if any of you can relate with some of what I've shared in this introduction. Yeah? Okay. So I'm Kerry. My background is that I'm a psychologist. I'm a holistic psychologist because I also am a body talk practitioner, and I've combined the modalities to work with body and mind. I've also specialized in trauma and mindfulness practices. And then I would say that I started burning out from around 2004 when I was studying part-time, working full-time, partying part-time, and training quite hectically to cycle, particularly one race, but I trained most of that year. And I started to notice symptoms of burnout then. But I was only actually diagnosed in 2013 with adrenal fatigue syndrome when I was really absolutely flat and I wasn't able to look after my baby at that time. And, it's this is where the sort of spiritual part comes in. I really believe it was all meant to happen, because then through the process of my healing, I discovered a whole lot about myself and helped me understand myself a lot better. But I also started attracting very specific people to my practice. And there were people who were battling with chronic fatigue and burnout. And I started to see similar patterns in them. And then along with the way that things happen and unfold, after we moved to St. Francis Bay in 2021, we had some difficulties with my son. Now we'd already been told in grade R that he had low muscle tone and a poor core and other things that required OT. And then when we moved here, they said his reading was a bit poor, and we managed to sort of catch up, but he hated having to do any form of homework. And then by the time we got to grade 2, the wheels really started to fall off. He had a teacher that was pretty controlling and very anxious herself, so she needed everything to be just so, and he didn't fit in her box. And she didn't know what to do with him. Because he wasn't really performing, and the more she pushed him and the more she did all those things that she did to make people be more motivated and do better, it made him shut down. So he shut down more and more, to the point where he couldn't even write his name on a piece of paper. No, that was it. He could write his name on a piece of paper, but he couldn't do anything else. So then the one day, out of the blue, she called us in and she said, "Oh, listen, he needs to be on Ritalin." So we had him assessed, and he was diagnosed with ADHD. And at that time, I said to the psychiatrist, like, "Listen, he's a very sensitive boy. He picks up everything around him. He's so attuned with people's energy and emotions, and he's also anxious. How much of this is that sensitivity?" And he said, "Yeah, it could be anxiety. I mean, we could put him on medication." But then to give him his due, he did say, "But I do think he's a bit young for medication." I said, "No, I don't want someone medication. I'm just trying to tell what of this, like, ADHD is this box, but to me I'm looking at who he is, and I can see why that would make him the way he is, because he is so sensitive, and he has these qualities that make him sometimes battle in normal situations and normal, and in life." And he didn't really get it. His thing was, there's a box. If he falls in the box, give him medication, and that's what's going to work. Okay, so soon after that, well, actually around the same time, my daughter, when she arrived at the new school here in St. Francis Bay, she took one look at all the kids in the classroom and ran outside and hid under a table. And she was 10 at the time. And it was the sweetest thing. All the little girls in the class all came outside and sat under the table with her. And eventually she was brave enough to come and sit in the class, but didn't speak for the first 2 weeks. And the teachers wanted to know if she was a selective mute or on the spectrum. And I said, no, she's just shy. And she's just, also very easily overwhelmed by her environment and very in with people and their energy. And so then I was like, I need to understand all this stuff a little bit better. So I took a deep dive down the rabbit hole of neurodiversity. And of course, started to notice that many of my chronic fatigue and burnout clients fitted the mold for ADHD or for neurodiversity in general. And many of them, in fact, I started to see that, I started to attract ADHD clients battling with burnout and chronic fatigue. And I then thought, I really do need to look into this. The main reason being, I want people to stop feeling like they're broken or there's something wrong with them. Because as you'll hear, it's not about there's something wrong with you. It's about there's something wrong with the system you're trying to fit into. And that just because you can't fit into it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. Okay. So it's about learning how to do that in a way that's not going to burn you out. That is what's important. Okay. So I'm going to put some slides up. No. Can everyone see that? Oh dear. Where's everyone now? There.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. All right. I've lost my slides. I'm just going to do this quickly. Okay, there we go. No. There we go. So what is neurodivergence? There isn't one specific definition for it, but in 1998, this term was coined by Judy Singer, who was a sociology and honors sociology student and wrote a thesis or a dissertation about it. But it relates to variations in the human brain that affect sociability, or like how we respond and interact with other people, learning and processing, mood, attention, and other mental functions. And so it's how we experience and respond to life based on nervous system variations. Now, I'd say I did a little bit of research. There's between about 15 to 30% of the population are supposedly neurodiverse. And not supposedly, but supposedly 15, let me put it this way, supposedly 15 to 30% of the population is neurodiverse. It's somewhere in between those. Now, what's really important is that these variations of the brain have been labeled in relation to what's called a neurotypical brain. And there's been a tendency to feel then that neurodiversity or neurodivergence is somehow then wrong or pathological. Now, what's really important to understand is that not very long ago in our evolution, people were exceptionally connected, sensitive, connected to the environment, connected to each other, to their feelings, to their bodies. This evolution of the neurotypical brain has served the way that our dominant culture functions, which is like mainly capitalism is about productivity and profit. So the brain that functions well in this environment is a brain that can be molded, that can conform, that can sit at a desk from 9 to 5 and perform every single day in the same way, that can sit in an office building with loads of people and loads of noises and can function well. And anyone who can't do that is then there then seems to be a weakness with that, because we've tied our value and our worth to our capacity to produce, to be productive, and to work. So it's not the differences in the brain that are pathological. It's actually the societal constructs of what normal is and how we've come to view these as normal. So I'm wondering, how well do you feel that you fit into the box that has been created? So examples of neurodiversity include ADHD, autism, Asperger's. So the autistic spectrum includes autism, Asperger's, and a few others. OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar disorder, dyslexia, learning difficulties, sensory processing disorder. And I'm learning about more every day. Someone was telling, a client mentioned amusia, which is the difficulty to hear or create music, I think. So symptoms of neurodivergence in general include struggling with reading and writing. But now, listen, let me just be clear here. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to have all of these if you are neurodiverse, because they are so general. Clumsiness, finding it hard to cope with crowds, bright lights, loud sudden noises, or social situations, difficulty with focusing or keeping still, nose, smiling, or social responsiveness, which can include a difficulty with empathy. Then I've got symptoms of ADHD. So you'll see I'm going to predominantly talk about ADHD just because I feel that's where my knowledge is strongest, and I don't really want to talk too much about that, which I don't yet know enough about. And also because I am seeing a lot of ADHD amongst the women that I see as clients. Okay, so ADHD can often include struggling with reading and writing, feeling driven by a motor, or difficulty sitting still, difficulty focusing, paying attention, interrupting when excited or anxious, impulsive behaviors, so it's when the emotions hijack the thought process. So interruption is also kind of an impulsive thing. Many different thought streams in the head all at once, it's different lanes, difficulties with time management. In fact, they call it time blindness. It's like, so I'm laughing because this drives me crazy. This drives my husband crazy, but it's always like, we're leaving in 10 minutes. And the things that I think I can do in 10 minutes are quite amazing, actually. It's hard to tell what 10 minutes is. Forgetfulness, big passionate emotions that feel very difficult to control. My son will often talk about feeling like he's got a volcano coming up inside him, which is a lot of his anger. Sensitivity to sensory input or needing more sensory input. So my son battles with loud noises, but at the same time, he likes to be squished and squashed and pushed against and squeezed because he likes proprioceptive input. Always feeling a few steps behind other people or ahead of them, easily bored, craving novelty, difficulty getting started with being productive, can feel frozen and overwhelmed and can then procrastinate. So this procrastination is a tricky one because I have found that I can kind of I can live in a bit of what's the word? I can fool myself. I think that I am being busy, but what I'm actually doing is being busy on the things that are not what I actually have to do. So I will do the things like maybe cleaning the house because I don't. It's all maybe just a bit overwhelming to focus on preparing masterclass, for instance. Becoming easily distracted. So, walk to the kitchen to go and get something, but on the way, see something that hasn't been put away, put it away. Then notice something in the cupboard that needs to be refilled. Do that, and then you forget that you're going to the kitchen. Self-medicating with alcohol and drugs, and a possible history of eating disorders. Eating disorders are 3 to 6 times higher in the neurodivergent population. Okay. I'm going to stop that now. I just want to find out, does this resonate with any of you? Maybe just, okay, so I see someone shaking, nodding. Maybe just put a few comments for me in the comment section. I'm curious. I'm not trying to diagnose here because like Soraya was saying at the beginning, we can, just because we have some of these doesn't necessarily mean we meet the diagnosis, but I'm also going to talk about the spectrum that we can be on, but it can also just be an indication of neurodivergence in general. Okay. Anyone? A little, but not that many, says Margot. Okay. Just the oversensitivity to sounds, crowds, etc., and the procrastination pattern you mentioned. All right. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about a sensitive nervous system. Let me ask you now, how many of you know what an HSP is? Yeah. Okay. All right. No, is this Sigrid? Sigrid, okay. Let me share this again. Okay. So many of my clients do know already what a HSP is. It's a highly sensitive person. So I do find that a lot of them will come to me and say, I battle with fatigue. I'm pretty sure part of it is because I'm an HSP. Now, this was a term that I came across probably about 4 or 5 years ago, particularly in regards to being an empath. In fact, very many healers, coaches, etc., are HSPs. It is the same thing as having a sensitive nervous system. When you have a sensitive nervous system or a highly sensitive person, your nervous system is generally going to be wired to be increasingly sensitive to emotional, sensory, or social input. So if you've often heard you're too sensitive, you shouldn't think so much, you overreact or calm down, then there's quite a high chance that you are a highly sensitive person or have a sensitive nervous system. Further symptoms of a sensitive nervous system are feeling on edge or restless, easily overwhelmed, sensitive to sensory inputs, including pain registration, very empathic or tuned to other people's feelings, easily overstimulated in a busy place when within a crowd, and big emotional reactions that feel difficult to manage. So in real life, what does this look like? It looks like being easily moved by beauty or pain, difficulty to watch a violent movie or the news, easily hurt by the words of others, a desire to curl into a ball when entering a room of people or just leave, feeling emotions and sensations that don't seem to come from you, So this is like an experience of feeling overwhelmingly angry or anxious, and you can't pin it on anything particularly that seems to be related to you. Oftentimes it's actually because you're picking up on someone else's emotions. When certain noises make you want to scream, run away, or curl up. And so just so you'll see that I have those three things because I'm going to talk about it later: fight, flight, or freeze, scream, run, or curl up. And often in your head with lots of different ideas or feelings going on there. So high sensitivity is neurodiversity. It is a sensitive nervous system is a divergence from a neurotypical nervous system. A neurotypical nervous system will have some sensitivity, but not to this degree. So when there's high sensitivity, a lot of the time, that is an indication of neurodivergence. So as I was saying earlier, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have one of those things that I said fall into the categories of neurodivergence, because everything is on a spectrum. We love our boxes. Oh, I don't. I mean, I studied counseling psychology instead of clinical psychology because clinical psychology is all about ticking the boxes. And I was more interested in experiences versus boxes. And most people don't fit all in one box. And so ADHD is a spectrum. We can be somewhere on that spectrum. And usually if we are neurodiverse and we have a sensitive nervous system, we'll have aspects of some of those other mental disorders, so-called mental disorders. Well, they are labeled mental disorders. And then, of course, anxiety is very common with neurodiversity and a sensitive nervous system, particularly if it hasn't been recognized and no one has supported you or helped you to manage it. So what also unfortunately happens is that many mental disorders are or often neurodiversity is mislabeled as a mental disorder. So I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, and for sure I had anxiety. I still am predisposed to anxiety, but that was not the root cause. So then people aren't being given the support that they need to manage a sensitive nervous system. Instead, they are often given medication or whatever the treatment protocol is for that mental health diagnosis. So what causes neurodivergence? This one is, for me, it's a bit murky because I say genetics, or is it? If you've ever read the book Scattered Mind by Gabor Mate, he says, and he speaks particularly about ADHD, but he speaks about the fact that we think it's genetic because usually one or both of the parents will have it. But in his mind, if you do the maths, you wouldn't have that much. He said it's increasing to the degree that it can't naturally increase through genetics. And so it must be through environment. In other words, those children who are brought up by parents who are neurodiverse or have a sensitive nervous system are more likely to then have a sensitive nervous system themselves through modeling and through the experience of being around parents who have unmanaged, what I'm going to tell you later, nervous system dysregulation because of neurodivergence. So unfortunately, most of the older generation, like if I look at my parents' generation, there's no ways anyone would have recognized that they were neurodiverse. And so instead, there would have been a lot of shame and guilt, a lot of chaos at times, not being able to manage, regulate emotions and behavior, for instance. And that's then more likely, you'll hear me say later, that's more likely to set up the development of neurodiversity in children, in their own children. So within the environment, also things that can create neurodivergence are infectious diseases, physical trauma or birth trauma, nutritional factors, and then, yeah, like I said, childhood, home environment and influences. And then trauma. So I've kind of now addressed that. So the trauma in our parents, which can create a sensitive nervous system or any mental health issues in parents or caregivers can then lead to a traumatic experience for the child, and that predisposes them to neurodivergence and, of course, their own trauma in their own lifetimes. Okay, so let's have a look. Yes. Lynn says, yeah. HSP, Margot HSP, so that's resonating. The ADHD didn't, but that is resonating. Sigrid, definitely all of those symptoms, right? So you all, so there's lots of association or resonance with being an HSP. Okay, that's great. There we go. So now let's look at the role that trauma plays in all of this. I think it's very important here just to define what I mean by trauma. Trauma is any experience that felt threatening to your personal integrity and physical body. This includes attachment trauma. Now, attachment trauma is feeling safely attached to a caregiver. If we do not feel safely attached, there is the possibility of not surviving. Now, just on a very primal level, think about a baby. If the mother is not properly attached to a child, there is the possibility of neglect, which can actually lead to, in real life, failure to thrive. But on a psychological level, there's the feeling of possibly not surviving. So attachment trauma is very real. So if a person feels that their authentic self could risk them being rejected or abandoned, then that is, they are experiencing trauma. But trauma is subjective. So what one person experiences as traumatic, another person may not. So yeah, we often we have Friday night movie night at our home. And we can watch a sad movie where someone dies. And my daughter and my husband will both have this very practical, well, it's just a movie perspective, while my son and I are bawling our eyes out. And then we won't stop being able to think about that movie for the next 24 to 48 hours. We're just very different. We set up differently. That doesn't mean to say that that's going to create trauma, but more sensitive people are more likely to have trauma, which is interesting because my daughter is sensitive, but she's also, because of the way her brain is wired, she's cut off from that more than, yeah, I don't fully understand it all. And then, like for instance, in grade 2, it was an interesting year for me. The teacher said to me, she called me a foghorn because I was talking too much in class. And it stung. It stung so much that I still remember it to this day, even though I don't remember much about my childhood. And I remember very clearly choosing to not speak up in her class again. And so one child may have been able to shrug that off. Another child, like me, took it deeply personally. And that's when you get told, oh, you're so sensitive, just why is it affecting you so much? It just really did. It stung. And it was also because it felt like that was who I was. I was a person who sometimes spoke up and at the wrong times and whatever. So there's a shame linked to it as well. And being labeled then because of that. So that's where the neurodiversity can really cause some trauma. And I'll also speak to that just now. So is your fatigue caused by trauma, or is it the other way? Is it by neurodivergence? Because you'll have heard me speak a lot about how our trauma results in us putting trauma adaptations in place, the ways that we change ourselves so that we will be safe and accepted, and that these trauma adaptations then can lead to fatigue. And for sure that can happen. But also, trauma comes before and can be caused by neurodivergence. So, for instance, if you have a sensitive nervous system that is more easily dysregulated, so in other words, feels emotions more hectically or more intensely, and someone who battles with overwhelm and sensory inputs is clearly more predisposed to experiencing a stressor as traumatic versus someone else. So sensitive nervous system then can lead to trauma, and trauma can lead to a sensitive nervous system. So Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And he says that trauma rewires the brain. It actually changes the neurology or the biochemistry of the brain so that it becomes more neurodivergent. Okay, so a sensitive nervous system can cause, can lead to trauma, can lead to experiencing life as traumatic. And trauma can come first, or there can be a vicious cycle, can then result in neurodivergence or exacerbating existing neurodivergence or sensitive nervous system. And then, of course, if you have neurodivergence, there's also the trauma that comes along just from being neurodivergent. For instance, being bullied, feeling different and misunderstood, being rejected, having sensory overstimulation. And then on top of that, there's changes that happen in the stress response. So there are already some changes in the neurotransmitters in a neurodiverse or sensitive nervous system. And this then results in further disruptions in the neurotransmitters like cortisol, dopamine, and norepinephrine. So we know all about cortisol and fatigue, cortisol imbalances and fatigue, dopamine and norepinephrine, which is noradrenaline, very linked to ADHD specifically. So all of these things I'll show you can be linked to fatigue. It can result in a disruption to a normal stress response and an overactive amygdala. Also, what I want to point out here, because this is a question someone asked me the other day, is why is my chronic fatigue worse during menopause? So when we at specific life stages, puberty, pregnancy, and menopause, perimenopause, menopause, when our hormones change, we because there's already changing hormones happening naturally. If you have a sensitive nervous system, those changes are experienced far more intensely, and there is more disruption as a result. So now I'm going to get to the interesting part. I want to first explain. So this is now nervous system dysregulation. So we've spoken about neurodivergence, of which there are some specific diagnoses, but a neurodivergent brain is generally also a more sensitive brain in general. We experience stresses in a way that is more sensitive. We experience stresses more intensely, which can then lead to trauma and more neurodivergence, and it creates a bit of a vicious cycle. And this is what happens. It's nervous system dysregulation. So let me explain the polyvagal theory. This was coined by Stephen Porges, and many of you will know about sympathetic. So this is a theory that explains the autonomic. It's how the autonomic nervous system, and particularly the vagus nerve, impact behavior and health. And he says that the sympathetic response is fight flight, which is very adaptive. We need to have the fight flight response to be able to survive. And then the foot goes on the brake a little bit, which takes us back into a parasympathetic state. Firstly, the ventral vagal state. Now, ventral vagal is what many people refer to as rest digest. It is where we feel connected. It's where we can make eye contact, where we can find the right words, communicate easily, and generally feel rested and calm. It is also where our bodies rejuvenate and heal and create more energy. Then the foot can go even further on the brake and go even further into the parasympathetic response, into dorsal vagal response, which is a shutdown or freeze state. This is then exhaustion, fatigue, apathy, lack of motivation. It is not being able to find the right words, not being able to think properly, and generally feeling frozen and stuck. This is also where fawning behavior takes place. This is people pleasing, which is actually an adaptive coping mechanism. Now, it's okay to sometimes go into fight flight, and it's okay to sometimes go into shutdown state. But if we are spending way too much time being hyper aroused in the sympathetic fight flight or hypo aroused in the dorsal vagal shutdown state, we have got nervous system dysregulation. And we don't come back into that lovely ventral vagal state where we can heal and we can communicate and we can connect. And so you can see there that how a lot of symptoms of neurodivergence can be explained by the different hyperarousal and hypoarousal. And I'm actually just going to quickly share something else with you. So these are symptoms of sympathetic hyperarousal, racing thoughts. Now I'm going to read the yellow ones because what you're going to see is that these are very similar to neurodivergence. Racing thoughts, impulsive, reactive, short-tempered, easily irritated, intolerant, restless, difficulty sitting still, muscle tension, interrupted sleep, too much energy, so hyperactivity, feeling like a volcano about to erupt inside you. Also, butterflies in the stomach, tight chest, rigidity, inflexibility. This is like, I need to do it this way. And then if someone says, no, but why don't we rather do this? It's very difficult to change the plan. Unable to focus, which can also be a sign of hyperarousal, a feeling of needing to escape or run. And then these are the behaviors linked to hyperarousal: excessive worrying about possible outcomes and negative consequences, needing to control outcomes, battling to let others take over, excessive planning and organizing, pushing and striving, rescuing and fixing, arguing, lashing out, walking or running away. My nickname for my son is Running Man. I don't call it to his face, but as soon as he can't tolerate something, he runs, to the point that like he'll run out the garden, into the road, up the road. He just runs. Symptoms of dorsal vagal hypoarousal. So yeah, those were behaviors. These are feelings. No, this is the wrong way. It's the other way around. Okay. Self-conscious, wired, sluggish, heavy, withdrawn, disconnected, wanting to curl up, overwhelm, slow or low energy. Feelings related to dorsal vagal. So this is the shutdown state. And this is behaviors: unable to concentrate, not able to remember words and names, not able to stay present, unable to focus, rescuing and fixing, unhealthy digestion, not wanting to be touched, easily given up. So what I'm wanting you to see there is the overlap between the symptoms of neurodivergence and sensitive nervous system and nervous system dysregulation. Let me go back to my slides. So the symptoms generally are related to sensory processing, emotional regulation, regulating the self, social differences and difficulties, feeling on edge. Okay, so what is common to neurodivergence, a sensitive nervous system, and even a trauma response is the dysregulated nervous system. Neurodivergence, if we had to manage neurodivergence, if people were conscious of neurodivergence, if we were provided with a space in which our neurodivergent and sensitive nervous systems were accepted and we could honor our nervous systems, we wouldn't have such dysregulated nervous systems. But because most of us are not even aware that we are neurodivergent or have sensitive nervous systems, we end up trying to, I'll show you now, we try and live our lives in a way that results in us becoming more and more dysregulated. And in the dysregulation, it becomes a vicious cycle. So how is this linked to chronic fatigue and burnout? This is a major one. It's really important. It is masking. So you will have heard me speaking about the holding personality, perhaps. This is where we adapt ourselves to fit in. Masking is the term they use particularly for ADHD. It's the same thing. This is the ways in which we try and match our nervous systems to a neurotypical world. Okay. It's the ways that we try and fit in to a neurotypical world by changing ourselves and doing what we think is normal. Women are particularly good at masking. And this is why so few women are diagnosed with ADHD. This is also because their hyperactivity is more in the head. It's more the racing thoughts and the busyness in the head, and not so much overtly being physical, but also because women, it's not acceptable. It's not generally socially acceptable for women to have dysregulate, to have like passionate emotional expression, and loud and angry and busy and physically hyperactive. It's less societally appropriate. It's like this unwritten rule. So women tend to put even more energy and effort into masking, but it certainly impacts men as well. And regardless of what one's gender orientation is. And that then is exhausting. It's exhausting. So I want to go back to that list I just showed you and show you some of those ways that we do this. So some of these symptoms are also some of the ways that we mask, needing to control outcomes and battling to let others take over. So control, we start to put systems in place. We learn how to do things in a way that no one really gets to understand what's going on inside, because we're so controlled. We control our environment in such a way that we manage what's going on inside, and no one really knows or understands. And then we just think that that's normal. So excessive planning and organizing is part of that. Could be like planning ahead when you need to know who's going to be at a function and what's going to happen so that you can prepare yourself. Pushing and striving and perfectionism. So I don't remember battling at school. But I also worked exceptionally hard. And I used to make notes and notes and notes. I think it helped me to focus by writing. So I used to make extensive notes and then make mind maps of my notes, and I spent hours. And so I got good marks, but I exhausted myself doing it. Rescuing and fixing for others or fawning can also be a coping mechanism that can exhaust us. And then I think this was the same, rescuing and fixing. Okay. So are you all with me at the moment? Right.
Yep, thanks.
Perfect. We've got a little bit more to go and then we'll be done. So other ways that that's neurodivergence or unmanaged neurodivergence, unrecognized neurodivergence can then lead to nervous system dysregulation and exhaustion is the overstimulation and anxiety that it causes. And then, of course, it links to chronic changes that affect the nervous system. So the more dysregulated we become because we have a sensitive nervous system that we're not conscious of or not managing well, then we have these increased changes in the nervous system, which affect our vitality. So if you've listened to the video I shared in the video series on body and mind connection, I explain a number of ways that this can happen. So many symptoms are activated by the nervous system response because they're necessary to help fight flight. And so, for instance, there's increased blood flow. The digestive system shuts down, and there's a shift in the microbiome and the neurotransmitters. The liver doesn't function as well. Blood sugar levels increase for energy. The immune system is compromised, and actually it's often more of an inflammatory response. And a lot of these symptoms are the symptoms that we see showing up in chronic fatigue, adrenal fatigue, etc. And they are because the nervous system is dysregulated and hasn't come back into ventral vagal. It's spending too much time in hyperarousal or hypoarousal. Another part of this is that if we're not coming back into ventral vagal, the mitochondria, which produce energy in our bodies, they can only be in the mode where they create energy or where they are in cell danger mode where they shut down. So it can't be doing both at the same time. So as soon as there's a perception of something being stressful, the mitochondria go into cell danger response and they shut down, and then they can't create energy. So if we're spending a chronic amount of time in that overwhelmed stress state, then our mitochondria are not creating enough energy. Hyperfocusing is specific to ADHD. It is where we can get very, very focused on something that interests us, and you know that you need to go to the toilet, you need to eat something, that you're exhausted, but you just you can't stop. And then when you do stop, oftentimes there's exhaustion afterwards. So obviously this can be exhausting, can lead to chronic fatigue. And then this one is a bit, it's probably one you won't have heard about, but your true self is the version of you that is neurodiverse. It is the version of you that was born very sensitive, empathic, loving, connected, and that you then had to mask and adapt. And this version of you is still really wanting to express itself in the world. But on top of masking, so adding on things so that no one can actually see this part of ourselves, we also have to suppress it. And we use energy to do that as well, to resist and suppress. It's all unconscious. We don't do this on purpose. So you can see that there are various ways that burnout and chronic fatigue can be related to neurodivergence and a sensitive nervous system. Okay, but what's really important is that there are gifts in neurodivergence. So before I even go, no, I'm going to first read this and then I want to do something for you. If we can learn what neurodivergence is and manage it, and manage our nervous system in such a way that we can then not, it won't then be dysfunctional. We can then embrace these gifts of neurodivergence, which are having a unique way of looking at the world and solving problems. Not all neurodiversity has empathy and attunement, although I believe that even people on the spectrum are actually exceptionally attuned, or not necessarily attuned, empathic, but they just don't know the correct social responsiveness and don't understand social cues. Risk takers and pioneers, often this can go with the sometimes the emotions or excitements can cause people to just do things without thinking as much, and they're more willing to do things like that because they've done it before. Very creative, thinking quickly in a crisis, and tending to deep dive into areas of interest. That's also specific to ADHD specifically. So I want you to just close your eyes just for a moment. And I'd like you to just listen to my voice and to really hear what I'm saying right now. You are enough, just the way you are. You do not have to fix anything or be different. I'm going to say that again. You are enough, just the way you are. You do not have to fix anything or be different. And I want you to feel what comes with hearing those words. It may be mixed emotions. I'm wondering if there's perhaps a little bit of ease. There might also be some fear. Because when we spent our whole lives trying to fix ourselves and be different so we can fit in, it can be scary to think about stopping doing that. But you know what? It's when we stop trying to fix ourselves and be different that we can free up energy to heal. So where does this take us? Firstly, please change your expectations of yourself. If you have a sensitive nervous system, a neurodiverse nervous system, then understand that you are not wrong or broken, and that you don't have to fit yourself to a neurotypical world. Yes, it is difficult to function in a neurotypical world, but it is possible to honor your nervous system more than what you're doing now. So this is also about changing your perceptions. It's about accepting yourself as you are and releasing the narrative of what is good, what is right, what is valuable. So, when we hear people who are always productive and always successful and able to function on very little sleep and work all the time, it's given so much value in our society. That's not you. You're not meant to be that person. You're not wired that way. And so don't think you need to be that person. The way you are is just fine. And so it's about then learning how to show up and function like that. And that can, and this is difficult because it's such a strong narrative that we have to do it that way, because as soon as I say allowing yourself to let go, people think of it as a weakness maybe, or it can feel scary. But what's interesting is, for instance, pacing. Neurodiverse people can work in bouts a lot of the time. So they can create a whole lot and then have a long period of time where they don't. They're just not able to. And in fact, if you had to look at that, sometimes they create probably even more over a specific time period. So if you put together the time, all they created there and the time that they didn't create anything, and in that time period, look at someone who creates consistently, sometimes the neurodiverse person actually creates even more. But because we focus on the lazy part, or the part or that is often labeled lazy, where we're not producing, we then feel like there's something wrong with us. So it's about learning to let that be okay and to try and find environments in which you are able to function in that way. Here's the other thing, is that if you do let yourself pace yourself, in other words, when you listen to your body and honor your nervous system and work in alignment with what you're able to do when you have energy, without then letting yourself rest when you don't. And here's the secret: letting yourself truly rest, not be busy in your head and judging yourself while you're resting. You will find you actually have more moments of productivity, because the productivity comes with less stress as well. So it's around having flexibility with how you do things, not having to fit into the normal status quo and the normal model of doing things. And obviously we have different degrees to how much that is possible within our personal lives and our work environments. This can involve maybe speaking to employers about creating a system where you only work a 4-day work week, or work some days at home and other days not, as long as you are meeting the criteria. Because like I said, the chances are you actually could create as much in 4 weeks as in 4 days as what someone else does, because you feel better in that amount of time, and then you have a sufficient break so that you can create better again in the next 4 days, as opposed to getting to the weekend absolutely crashing out and barely managing to get back to work on Monday. So I'm just trying to give you examples of what pacing would look like. It's also about balancing masculine and feminine energy. So the distorted masculine energy is a neurotypical brain and neurotypical nervous system. It doesn't have any connection or much connection with feminine. The feminine energy is a neurodiverse system, a nervous system. It is emotions, it is being embodied, it is connection, it is creativity. And what we actually need is a little bit of both. You need a healthy masculine to create a good container, drive, and direction for the feminine. And a big part of how to embrace your gifts without burning out as a neurodiverse person is learning to work with your body. This is learning to feel into and honor what your body is capable of and when. It is about learning to feel into when you are activated and then knowing what to do about that. It is about addressing your trauma that has been unresolved, so that there's less nervous system dysregulation, so that you can embrace your neurodiversity and your sensitive nervous system more so. It is all the gifts of that. And it is about helping so it's about, again, changing perceptions and pacing means that you understand that you need to take more time to allow your nervous system to balance and to rejuvenate versus other people. And it's not a weakness. It is the way you are wired, so that you can shine in the world, so that your gifts can be expressed in the world. And so it's learning how to heal the nervous system through nervous system practices, through breathing, through mindfulness, through grounding, through vagus nerve practices, and regularly bringing these in, as opposed to berating yourself and feeling lazy when you aren't able to function, or like I said, procrastinating and filling it with other forms of doing. It's about allowing it to be okay to not be doing. So what now? So like I've mentioned, there's a spiritual aspect to this, because I think that many people who are neurodiverse have many gifts, and that actually the neurodiversity is those who are neurodiverse are actually come with even greater gifts than others. And that maybe doesn't sound so good, but people who are neurodiverse often are massive pioneers and make huge changes in the world. And if we can embrace that as our calling, and many of my clients come to me and they say, I have such a sense of what I can do in the world, and I'm just so exhausted I can't do it. Okay, my son was 8 and he said to me, Mommy, my heart tells me that I'm going to make a big difference in the world. And I believe that more and more and more of our children are going to be born neurodiverse and with these sensitively wired nervous systems. And that is actually what needs to happen is our society needs to become more tolerant of and allowing of a way of living that acknowledges and nurtures the neurodiverse system so that those gifts can be expressed in the world. So I'm going to be creating a video on Wednesday more about spirituality, about the masculine and the feminine, about how chronic fatigue was my awakening, my spiritual awakening, and how it is for many other people. And then next week, Monday, I'm going to do a live call where I will share the exact 5 steps that are part of my fatigue to flow blueprint, which is what came about through working with women with chronic fatigue and burnout, and men, by the way. It's just that I mainly work with women. So this includes addressing how to heal the nervous system. So if you are, just for those who are going to be watching the replay in YouTube, if you go down below in the comments, there's this link which you can sign up to my mailing list. If you click on it, you can sign up to my mailing list. You'll be notified of the links and the videos when they're being released. So there you go. A lot of information. I hope I haven't completely overwhelmed you. Any thoughts or questions on any of this?
Kerry, I had a question.
Yes.
An empath would fall into, I'm assuming, this neurodivergent, highly sensitive person category. It falls into that.
Yes, correct. Yes. To fully embrace your gifts as someone who's neurodiverse, you need to try and regulate the nervous system as much as possible. Because, so like I said, you can have neurodiversity, but then that leads to further experiences of trauma, especially if it's not recognized and you're not supported with, which then leads to further trauma or leads to trauma and difficulties and more stress. And that then it creates more neurodiversity in terms of having a dysregulated nervous system, and it becomes more and more dysregulated. And that is our template. So it's about learning, and this is very important actually, is that our brains actually can change the wiring. We are able to change the wiring of our brains, but we need to learn how to do that. So a big part of what I share in my coaching, something you can look into is like vagus nerve practices or toning the vagus nerve. A lot of it is around when we connect back to the body, just even in connecting with the body and accepting it as it is, that already calms the nervous system. So just that acceptance of self and acceptance of the nervous system it stops that resistance, which is stress. It's stressful. And working with masculine and feminine energy, learning how to. So let me share with you today. So now I meditate and I drop into working with masculine and feminine energy, where I then feel I get clarity, because when I'm in that calm space, my creativity is so much more easy to access, and I get more clarity on how to put it into something. So I've learned how to calm my nervous system to embrace the gifts of my brain. And I've been doing this now for 5 years, and it's becoming easier and easier. So it is fixable in that sense. But you're always going to, I'm still always going to be predisposed to anxiety and to being very sensitive, but now I'm learning to embrace my sensitivity as my gifts. Does that answer your question? But remember, in your work, it's safer in a personal context to bring those changes in. And then when you're in a work context and you're that one person who's asking for some flexibility, it's not easy. We don't want to be that one person. We've had too many experiences of people already maybe feeling that we're not up to it, or lazy or sensitive, so there's much more masking that happens in our social and work environments than at home in our personal context. Does that make sense? Okay. Thanks for that question. All right. So if there's no other questions, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. me. And just watch the space for the video that I'll be releasing on Wednesday and for the live call on Monday. And take care. Right. Bye.
Thanks, Kerry.